Citizen. I'm your host, Tia Carol Jones. I'm here today with Leon Walker, CEO and founder of DL3 Realty Advisors. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, I just want to say Mr. Garth, bless his soul, was one of my heroes, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be here in the studio with you. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and son of two public school teachers who in 1969 decided to start a business. And that business was based on a need, and that need was they had a small young child, me, that had to go somewhere during the day so they can go to work. Today we know it as child care, but back in 1969 there was no one providing quality education. So they actually said, well, they looked and couldn't find a quality center, place for me to attend. And so necessity being the mother of invention, they said, let's do our own, start our own. And that became the Developmental Institute. And then by 1979, we were building our first building from the ground up, and we had centers across the south side serving families. And we built that last center over at 71st and Stony Island, where it's Emmett Till Road on one way, and then come the other way is in honor of my dad, Dr. H. Leon Walker. So we had 1,000 kids in our program across the south side for 40 plus years, and we finally retired my mom and exited out of that business in 2019.
How did you get into real estate development?
So we got into it really as a family. One of the things I talk about in a recent opinion piece that I penned in Crane's Chicago Business, in my efforts right now as I move, from just purely doing deals to also looking how the next generation can get involved in this business. Commercial real estate is one where less than 2% of the professionals in commercial real estate are black or brown. So we are not participating. I had the benefit of growing up in a family of educators who also believed in community, so education and development, and they began making investments in commercial properties in order to grow the education business. So that's how we learned the business, from around the kitchen table, and working with contractors and architects from an early age. And as I said, in '79, when interest rates were 21%, we actually went into a building and built a building from the ground up, and I got my first hard hat on that job as a young 13-year-old. So we don't have all the selfies and pictures from that time, but the memory is here, and it's solid. And so that really, planted the seed in me of how we can execute projects that are not only important and catalytic for our communities, but provide good services, and you can do well.
Why did you want to start DL3 Realty, and what is that institution's mission?
So, like so many of our my cohort, my colleagues, we all grew up in the neighborhoods. But once we get a great education, for me going to Michigan, then University of Chicago for grad school and law school, we get pulled out of our neighborhoods. There's a real significant issue with a brain drain out of our communities. And so getting pulled out of the neighborhood and going into corporate, because they're grabbing our talent, is what I did, like so many others. And I left, and went, despite my dad wanting me to come back into the business at the time, that was his dream. But I left and, went to work for first Citigroup, and then the largest real estate firm in the world called JLL, where I became a partner in the Los Angeles office. Then in 2000, when my dad got ill and passed untimely, I had a decision to make. The firm wanted me to go to Singapore. That was the next assignment for this global real estate firm, and as a young partner. And I made a decision to come back to the south side of Chicago. And, I've been here now, over 20 years, doing work in the community, sometimes not as noticeable, but just as important. We started in the far south side, in the neighborhoods that we grew up as a kid. I learned to swim at the Y on 111th and State. Bought my first shoes at Tom McCann. Used to, remember, was on Halstead. I used to remember going to Gately's on Michigan Avenue. So, that far south side community is where, my roots were. And so we started doing deals out there, important deals, including the first deal in Chicago to use new market tax credits. And this was back in 2007. And so we built the medical office building that was designed to help stabilize Rosen Hospital by bringing an FQHC, which is a health center, federally qualified health center, that could take the non-emergent cases out of the hospital, and you could, bumps and bruises, and so that you can get that care in an ambulatory, environment. And because the emergency room is the highest cost center for a hospital, so you don't want bumps and bruises in the hospital. You want to get that out of the hospital so you can focus on the true emergencies. And so this was right before the Obamacare and the ACA, and we focused a lot on healthcare, and we've done a lot of healthcare real estate, particularly with FQHCs. But as part of healthcare, that's how we got into grocery, and understanding that food is really, if we're going to bend the curve on healthcare, we've got to start looking at our diets, some of the behavioral choices that we're making, and that's how we got into grocery. But we've been mostly focused on job creation, creating community anchors, whether it's education, which is our history and background, whether it's quality retail, or now we also have a group at DL3 that focuses on workforce housing. And so we've got a number of workforce housing developments at key TOD, transit-oriented development sites on the south side, so we're leading that wave. And as part of this overall approach, like I said, sometimes it's an evolution of thought, not an epiphany in the middle of the night. And that evolution of thought is what we now call venture development. And venture development is a strategy, investment strategy of how we bring private equity and capital into our neighborhoods, and we combine it with public resources and charitable support to create high impact developments. And so I've been sharing that thesis widely. There's a white paper out there called Venture Development, TED Talk, and just recently last week gave a talk in front of 1,500 downtown associations from across North America, and they're taking this idea back to their communities. And it's not just about how we move capital into our equity and finance deserts, because there's an issue of financial fairness in our communities that has to be addressed. But it's also how do we lift up the next generation of entrepreneurs and risk takers who could become the developers we need to execute projects. And so I started and co-founded an initiative here in the city of Chicago called the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Initiative, or CEMDI for short. So that's CEMDI.org. And so CEMDI.org is where we are convening and hosting a lot of conversations with emerging developers who want to get into the commercial real estate business. And we're also providing them with support. And we have a proposal out there, one of our funders, Chicago Community Trust, to actually start driving more money for the pre-development. What I talk about in my most recent article is how do we get more pre-development equity to help entrepreneurs execute projects. They have great ideas, vision, dream, but they need that pre-development equity in order to start a project, to get it to the closing table. So I always use the example of saying, we're Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody loves to come and sit down and eat, Thanksgiving dinner once the meal is put on the table. But how many people want to go with you back in the hot kitchen and cook, to buy all the ingredients and mix it up and pull it together, right temperature and so forth. That's pre-development. And so when it's finally ready to be served, everybody comes to the table. That's usually your equity, your debt, your partners, and so forth. So, but it takes the entrepreneur, the visionary, to go back in that hot kitchen and then cook it up and follow some recipes and make up some of their own recipes and use their own imagination to create a meal that everybody wants to eat. So that's just an analogy to give you some idea of what it takes to lift up something that is a fallow, vacant site or dilapidated building with no use right now, and have a vision for what that can be in the future. And so we need to support our entrepreneurs that are Black and brown folks that come from our own neighborhoods and our own communities. I'm also got a call out there for all the talent that has left our communities to come back and bring that educational resources and those relationships to our neighborhoods, so that we're not always asking someone to do something. We tend to be in a position where we say, when is someone going to come bring the restaurant, bring the store, bring the job creator? No, if we have the tools, we already have some talent. If we have the tools and we have the financial resources, we can start taking those risks and making those things happen in our own community.
What are some of the projects DL3 Realty has developed that people might know?
Yeah, so right here in this neighborhood of Chatham, right down the street, is our Discover Call Center. So back in 2018, prior to COVID, we made there was a wave of closures of Targets at that time, and this was a retail apocalypse, they called it at the time. Amazon was taking over the world and displacing all the brick and mortar retailers. And so some of that has happened and been accelerated through COVID. But at that time, everyone had very dire predictions. And so Target actually was closing both of their South Side locations, the one in Chatham at 87th and Cottage, as well as the one at 119th Street in Marshville in Morgan Park. And so we worked with Target. It was kind of a high risk and high opportunity situation, because not many people were rushing in to take on a 130,000 square foot building on 10 acres of land without some capacity and some vision about what it could be in the future. And we took on two. So when the call came out, who would want to come back into our community to take on this incredible sort of disappointment for our neighborhoods, but also an opportunity. Who could see something coming positive out of that very negative story? And it took me a moment, but I did say yes when the call came in that we would do it. And we negotiated a deal with Target, bought the buildings, and converted both of them to job creators, job centers. One with Blue Cross Blue Shield in the Morgan Park community, where Maurice Smith, who's the head of the parent of Blue Cross Blue Shield, actually grew up, in Morgan Park, and so he was a partner in that project. And then Discover Financial Services in Chatham. So we created 3,000 jobs just with those two efforts alone. We also are, focused on quality workforce housing in Woodlawn and Inglewood and South Shore with some important projects. But we've been busy doing this for over 20 years now. So not everything is as well known as those projects. Everyone says the Blue Cross Blue Shield and Discover, is like an overnight success. No, we've been doing this for a while, and it does take time.
That kind of leads me into my next question of what are some of the upcoming projects that are slated?
Yeah. So it's a tough time right now for those of us that are in business in general, but certainly in the commercial real estate business. And so we're fortunate to have some great partners on both the private funding side, on the philanthropic side, and of course with our municipal partners. But we've got a big industrial project we're really excited about. We have some environmental issues to deal with there. We have the Thrive Exchange development in the 7th Ward with Alderman Greg Mitchell. That's a really exciting project to, the old barbershop street, the barbershop movie street, to reposition and redevelop that with quality workforce housing, new retail, and new healthcare services. It's really an exciting opportunity to invest over $100 million into an intersection that has been forgotten. And, where last year, about March or so, there were something over 70, 80 shots on the corner, sending a bunch of folks to the hospital, and some died. And so, there's a lot of stress and strain and, trauma in our neighborhoods. And so we recognize that. And so we believe firmly that one of the ways to reverse that vicious cycle that's been holding down our communities, generation after generation, is that we got to drive large scale investment. And that large scale investment has to be concentrated in a way that it can create a positive ripple effect in the neighborhood. So, but we've been busy.
You've also done the Jewel Osco and Woodlawn Friend. Is it Friend Health?
Friend Health, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, we've been a part of a lot of important movements in the Woodlawn community and over the years, and that's a focus area for us. And it's hard to believe, but back then when we delivered the grocery store, they have been trying for 10 years to actually find a grocer. And through our relationships and sort of creative marketing of the site, we secured Jewel Osco, but it took some time for people to believe, not only for the community to believe it could happen, but also for Jewel to see the value. Most of the other grocers had passed. Grocery is one of the toughest businesses, because you operate on very thin margins and a lot of volume in order to make up those very thin margins. And so we brought a first class quality store. Shout out to Scott and Dale of Terrico, one of our partners on the deal, and University of Chicago ultimately came in and is a long-term owner of the site. But Preservation of Affordable Housing was also involved in having secured the site initially. And we came in with a big vision, and we had to convince many folks that a grocery store would work in that location. This is before Obama Presidential Center selected Woodlawn.
Okay.
So Woodlawn was still, not the Woodlawn that it looks like a no-brainer today, but back then it was perceived as a big risk. But we knew it would work, and we know that bringing some key assets to our neighborhoods, whether it's healthcare, whether it's quality schools, quality housing, of course, food access. This is a part of building a community, building a neighborhood. So while the Obama Presidential Center is extremely important investment for the South Side, how many times are you going to go to the OPC?
Right.
Maybe once a year,
Right.
But you're going to go to that store. You're going to need healthcare, weekly. You need prevention. You need other trips. So this is what makes a neighborhood. So we like to think that we're a big part of the success of Woodlawn right now.
You kind of spoke about this, but why have you been so dedicated to equitable development and affordable housing throughout your career?
Yeah, so it was really, like I said, it was an evolution for me. Like so many, of my contemporaries and colleagues that grew up, on the South Side or the West Side, if we got a good education and great job, we're not staying in those communities. We leave. But it was my parents, who were public school teachers, who, really instilled that notion that to do well doesn't mean I can't do good. Okay. And so, it took some life-changing circumstances because I was off in corporate doing my thing. But, when my dad passed, who was the patriarch of our family and who had been, such a visionary for making these investments across the South Side, I decided to turn my career around and return home. So being a native son, coming back to the neighborhood. And, I think, now over time, I've evolved. What do I think are the key investments? How do we structure things so that they can be successful both for the equity, the at-risk equity that comes into the deal, but also take into the community's input and be successful at creating additional and attracting additional investment. So no one project can stand on its own in an island. You have to think, beyond the four walls of the building. And that's what DL3 does. DL3 is always thinking beyond the four walls of the building and how can we catalyze and encourage and attract additional investment in the neighborhood. So the most success we can have is not only attracting additional investment, because we can do one building on one corner or another building here or there, but it's really bringing that wave of capital that we all need. We're living, many of my family, and, we all have cousins and, aunts and, extended family. It's tough, and so once you sort of think about that, and how you can do more, not just for your own immediate family or yourself, but what drives you is a bigger mission for the neighborhoods I grew up in as a kid. And it just so happens that in my family that still lives in those neighborhoods, right? It just so happens that we have now, with my education background, been able to think about it from a structural standpoint. Much like some of my heroes, Dempsey Travis, who was out here, thought about things more structurally, wrote a great book, Real Estate is Gold in Your Future. I read that early on. And so you start to just digest and process that information. And what do we need today? And so for me, it's not just about our next deal, but it's about the next generation. That's where I am right now. And so what you have there is a strategy report for the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Initiative. And I'm talking about it widely because we need more entrepreneurs and risk takers, the developers in our community, to start moving things. But we got to find a way to get them the capital, not just talk to them. There's so many initiatives out here just talking to folks, telling them how to, do business, or, they need to build their network. But, I've spent time with the developers, and so many come to me for advice and mentorship, and I spend time with them. And it's, some of them, guidance is always good, but money isn't what they need, right? So we got to figure out a way to get them some capital so they can pursue their dreams. And listen, the research is clear that that small emerging firms provide better returns on investment than established folks. That's clear in investment advisory business. It's also clear in real estate, because when you're working at your early stage and you're working, you are putting everything into that. You're going the extra mile to see that that project becomes a success. And so you end up generating, higher returns. So it's not that they're bad investments. Of course, everything can be tweaked and business plans need to be put in place. They need to be well researched, well thought through. You need to have good credit, all the basics. But once you have those things, then, now what's lacking is the access to capital and the financial fairness. So as a people, as a culture, as a tribe, we have been we've been structurally and systemically, excluded from wealth building initiatives. We all know about what happened after World War II and the GI Bill that provided, a way for majority populations to get access to low interest, entry level pricing on homes. Well, they lived in those homes, raised families. 30, 40 years later, those homes are worth 5, 10 times what they paid for it. They take that money, put it in the stock market booms and goes up. They get another 5, 10x. And so now they can have the capital to, when their grandson now goes out and says, hey, I want to build something, in the neighborhood that I grew up in, they have the capital to be behind that vision. We don't have that, okay? So I was at Operation Push a couple of months ago at the final sort of Push conference that we'll probably see the Reverend preside over. And, was just so blessed to get an award with him there from them. It just, hearing him, and I recorded it because it's one of those statements that you get a moment of honesty and just transparency and truth. And he says, we spent the last 50 years, let me see if I can actually quote, paraphrase what he said. He said, on the long and perilous road to freedom, we have focused on getting a seat at the political table, but without economic development, it's meaningless. He's coming to that realization 50 years later after being in the struggle, that if we don't focus on the necessity of building our own communities and having a stake in the growth of our own communities, we can get all the political power that we want. It's just not going to change our future outcomes.
Where can people go to find out more about you and DL3 Realty?
For better or worse, that's not hard. You can look that up. My name will come up with a number of different things, but the one I want them to focus on is the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Initiative. If you are looking to be a future entrepreneur, risk taker in the commercial real estate space, this is a program that's designed to be of assistance and help and guide you along that way. We also support a scholarship at the Roosevelt University Marshall Bennett Institute of Real Estate, and we just awarded our first scholarship to a young brother coming up in the business, and we're looking for more candidates for that position to help them get on their way to a master's degree in real estate development. And if they have a college education, they can now get that specialized training to be a developer, and we actually provide some mentorship too. I was also part of the Chicago Association of Realtors, one of the beneficiaries and awardees of their legacy awards, and we're working with them for a scholarship program to take existing realtors and help them get into commercial real estate. So if you've been working in the purely residential space and you want to tackle larger transaction, larger deals, more complexity, this will be a good opportunity for them. So Chicago Association of Realtors, Roosevelt Institute, Marshall Bennett Institute of Real Estate, and the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Initiative. Those are resources that I think can be really helpful as you start to chart this new career.
Okay, great. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know?
It's there are a couple of ways to look at the times that we're in. We have opportunity and potential that exists in our neighborhoods and our people. We need to not just be so jaded by the news that seems to have a drumbeat of negativity. We are stronger together. So much of our time is spent operating, as we say, in different silos, not coming together. The biggest movement and progress that we've made as a people has been when we've all worked together. That means the political, the business, the philanthropic, even those that are operating on our streets and doing their thing. We got to all come together, and we're stronger, because no one individual, business, company, institution, the problems are bigger than government, bigger than charity. So we kind of stop relying just on government and charity and look to how we can build back our businesses. And so I grew up here in this neighborhood, right? And black business was, booming in the 70s. Whether you want to look at what, Mr. Gardner was doing on 87th and Dan Ryan, or even up and down 87th Street with stores like Ham and Nate's, Brown's Tire, others, or if you want to go even to Al Johnson Cadillac in South Shore. I mean, we had businesses, major businesses, moving in our neighborhoods. So if we're going to get back to some form of progress and self-sufficiency, we've got to support and encourage and lift up the next generation of entrepreneurs and risk takers, whether that's in the commercial real estate space or other businesses. So let's get to it.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you.
Remember to tune in next week for Conversations with the Citizen, the place where real news can be heard. You can listen on iHeart, Spotify, and iTunes podcast streaming services.